Hi, everyone. I'm Logan Medish, host of the High Caliber History podcast. Appreciate you tuning into this episode today. It's some very special guests, plural, because I have not one, not two, but three fantastic folks from Jamestown Rediscovery joining me on the show today. We've got Michael Lavin, the Director of Collections and Conservation, Dr. Chris Wilkins, the Conservator, and Janene Johnston, the Assistant Curator. Good morning and welcome to all three of you.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you for joining me on the show today. I appreciate you being here. Jamestown is a very special site. Obviously, you guys know that working there, and it's interesting because we talked a bit about this when we were planning this. And for people who didn't grow up in Virginia, they tend to think that when we're talking 1600s and settlement of what becomes the United States, they tend to think of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock in 1620. And I didn't grow up in Virginia, but I did spend a number of years living there. And I learned quickly that Virginia is very proud of the fact that they've got Plymouth Rock beat by 13 years. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Jamestown and your site there in terms of the historic importance in the development of our country.
Yes, well, thank you for having us. And yes, Jamestown is plays an extremely important part in our nation's founding. It is the first permanent English settlement in the New World. And the Virginia Company adventure that's undertaking this voyage starts in 1606. They land at Jamestown May 13th, 1607, and then they construct a fort late May after a skirmish with the local Virginia Indians, and then it's basically a artisans and gentlemen soldiers and so forth that are basically negotiating space with the native Virginia Indians. And there's a fort on the site until about 1624 or 5. And during that time, it's expanding. And it's the capital until 1699 when it moves to Williamsburg. It then becomes a plantation site. It's basically plowed under. So these are all earth-fast buildings mostly. And the fort, has not been in existence for a few decades. And basically it just gets kind of lost. And there are even records pre-Civil War that it's eroded into the James River. But the Jamestown Rediscovery Project was started in 1994 to find out if there are any remains still on the island of the 1607 James Fort. And we were very lucky. It was the right people at the right time. And our organization, Preservation Virginia, is very willing and have been very good stewards of the property since 1893. They've been the property owners of this little corner of the island. And we've just been extremely successful. The site keeps giving and we love it. So yes, we found the fort. We made that announcement in 1996 with the governor of Virginia. And we have been excavating for the past 27 plus years and have uncovered over 3.5 million artifacts associated with that 1607 to 1624 time period. It also should be noted that some major events happened here. First, representative government meets in the church, the government that our government is based on. First, enslaved Africans arrived in 1619. Pocahontas marries John Rolfe at the chancel rail of our 1608 church. That was done in 1614. There's so many major events that happen here on this site, and we've been trying to explore more and more.
That's great. Yeah, so much history there, and all underground. I mean, this is an archaeological site, and that's fascinating that you guys have recovered, would you say, 3.5 million artifacts out of the ground, and that's pieces of American history that you're unearthing and helping to tell the earliest portions of our story. And it's amazing what you can do with the artifacts and tell in fairly great detail the story just out of the stuff that's coming out of the ground, because physically there's nothing left in the built environment from 1607 to 1624. So that obviously makes the archaeology of utmost importance. And what I think is really great is you guys have an extremely tight date range on the site, which is absolutely vital to being able to properly date things. And that's kind of a luxury that a lot of sites don't necessarily have. You guys have, it's what, less than 20 years, I think, if I'm doing my math right. So you've got a very tight date range there, which makes it really, really nice when it comes to being able to figure out what's happening and when and where in your stratigraphic layers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Janene.
The site itself is such a small date range when you think about archaeological sites, but even within that, we have specific features that we know were filled in between these just couple of years. So that even more kind of narrows down date ranges for specific things, which is really cool and interesting.
Gotcha.
And we're historic archaeologists. We pair what we're finding in the ground and use the surviving historic record in order to link up the two. And once you start making one link, you can start making those links between, like Janene was talking about, these narrowly dated few years features. You might pick up one particular layer that has evidence of the starving time winter of 1609, 1610, or Lord Delaware's arrival June 10th, 1610, or Governor Urgel's house is being constructed in 1616. All of these things, we can then take the layers of the soils and then the artifacts that come out of those and start putting them into those tight date ranges.
Gotcha. And the artifacts that you guys are recovering, there's a lot of amazing stuff that you have discovered over the years. And I'm curious, just real quick, for each three of you, if you had to pick a favorite piece from the site. I know that's kind of hard to do. It's like asking someone if they have a favorite kid. Secretly, everyone does. They just don't admit it. Is that something you might be able to rattle off?
Well, I know what his answer is going to be.
Yeah, I'd have to say mine is the pistol itself. It's
the unlocked pistol.
Yeah, it's been around for nearly the entirety of my conservation career, or I've been associated with it in some degree or another for nearly my entire conservation career. When I came to Jamestown, I didn't realize that it was still awaiting conservation. And so I was surprised when it was put in front of me, but also excited to continue with the conservation of it. So absolutely the pistol. It's my adopted son.
Good deal. See, I told you, everyone has a favorite kid. And we will definitely get to talking more about the pistol in a minute, but y'all's favorite artifacts?
For me, it would have to be the fort itself, to be part of a project that, when we started Jamestown Rediscovery in April of 1994, there was great hesitation. What would we find? Is there any chance of the fort still being here? Are we going to find even any artifacts associated with the first landing and so forth? And we, in my wildest dreams, I started with Jamestown Rediscovery in August of 1995. So we had already found a portion of the south curtain, but the east curtain, we found the corner of the fort when I was here. And we're like, well, what else could it be? It's basically, it's a slot trench in the ground, and there's descriptions of the fort. To debunk the oral history that it's in the water, it's been lost forever, and then all of a sudden we're finding 85% of James Fort is still on land, and it's in great condition, and that has to do with how well the Preservation Virginia were stewards of the property. And so it was the right archaeologist, it was the right project, it was the right property owners, it's the everything aligned, and we have this amazing program, public archaeology program, that's going to go on into the future. So the fort for me is, if I had to pick an artifact, I'd say the fort.
I like it.
Yeah, I know it's
a technicality. It's a technicality, but we'll take it.
We found artifacts in the fort.
That's right.
Honestly, mine kind of bounces around based on what I'm actively working on. So when I work with the lead shot collection, we've got really interesting waste materials from the production of the lead shot. So I really like the melting pan waste when I'm poking around in that drawer. When I am working with buttons, there's a very particular mixed material button that I don't know anything about at this point, but am looking forward to learning more about. So it just kind of depends on what's actively in front of me and I'm researching it.
Gotcha.
I know that we're only allowed to pick one,
Oh, okay.
but I have to. There's one other object that when I got my hands on it, now I've never worked on the object as a conservator, but it did pass through my hands at one point, and it was such a magical experience for me. But Michael, if you wouldn't mind talking about the Jamestown tag.
Oh yeah, that was
So we found only one artifact in the collection that actually says Jamestown on it. YAMES, and then the next line TOWNE, and it's a tag that would have gone onto a barrel or something that was going to Jamestown. And that artifact is just a small lead tag with the stamped letters Jamestown on that. And that was really cool to be like, oh yeah, we are definitely in the right spot. It literally says Jamestown on it, and it dates to between 1611 and 1616. So it's during the fort period. It actually came out of the same well that the pistol came out of. And that it has even more meaning to us now because we were approached by NASA in 2007, and they asked us to give them an object that could fly up to the space station. And so STS-117, we had astronaut Patrick Forrester come take the artifact to NASA. It goes up into space, does almost 6 million miles in space, and then Patrick Forrester brings it back to us literally on the archaeology site and presents it back to us after. And the reason why NASA chose this artifact was because, or asked us for an artifact, is because they were equating early 17th century European expansion to space travel.
Sure.
So that's the connection between the two. And it was
Absolutely.
The 400th anniversary of Jamestown in 2000.
Yeah, that's amazing. You figure the individual who tacked that tag, thinking that it's going across the ocean to this unknown, uncharted territory. It's the same thing as when the astronaut took that tag up into space. That's very, very cool.
I do have one if I had to choose a physical artifact. Since
Okay.
he changed his mind.
See what you did, Chris.
obviously the fort is of most importance, and that's what I always try and relay to the public when I'm giving a tour or talking to the general public about what's the most important thing you found, and that's the fort itself. But we did find a small silver box that was placed on top of a coffin of who we believe to be Captain Gabriel Archer, who died during the starving time winter of 1609 and 10. And what was so interesting about this object was it was unassuming, you know, in its size and form, but the value that it has is it's a religious object. So this was a Catholic reliquary that was placed on top of Captain Gabriel Archer's coffin. And that made us rethink the role of religion at Jamestown, because, you know, it was not, you could be put to death for being a Catholic. So finding something like this reliquary made us think differently. Maybe there was a private Catholic cell at Jamestown. It's an unassuming object, but the presence of that in the earliest remains of the Anglican Church at in the New World, it's an amazing story, and we have lots of religious items. So these folks are bringing their beliefs with them. They are converting some of the Virginia Indians, most notably Pocahontas. So this is something that to me made me rethink the role religion played in the founding of Jamestown, which you know, they're called artifacts. They're facts. So we just take those and create the narrative behind it. And we can't always be 100% positive, but
Sure.
This to us, it has 7 fragments of human bone and 2 fragments of a lead ampulla that's been broken inside of it. And the amazing story of the science that we used to open this virtually. We've never physically opened it. We used modern science in order to open it and then do 3D prints of the contents inside. That's an amazing story.
That is, yeah, that is technology at its finest. It's very cool. So talking about the museum that you have there, you guys have a new exhibit that's gone up that's dealing with gentlemen soldiers. And there is, I was watching a YouTube video that started all of this. I was watching a YouTube video with Chris, and one of the objects in this video in your new exhibit is a pistol. And we'll talk, I keep saying we'll talk about the pistol, we will, but it's important to understand these gentlemen soldiers and how that concept of a gentleman soldier comes into being, because obviously they're coming over here to nothing in their terms and in their minds, and they are going to have a lot to defend themselves against. So what is the mindset, you know, of these gentlemen soldiers as they come over? What kinds of equipment are they bringing with them in anticipation of what they may encounter?
So these gentlemen soldiers, the ones that we have identified as gentlemen soldiers, like Wingfield or Yardley, someone like that, these are not noble individuals, but they are of high birth, and they have lots of experience with other European campaigns, warfare, fighting with the Dutch against the Spanish, the English against the Irish in Ireland. So they're bringing with them a lot of experience in warfare, and they were outfitting themselves for this warfare. So they're almost like traveling mercenaries, but not, don't like to use that term, but it's easy for people to understand. But they also are protecting the investment, or sometimes even their investment in the Virginia company. So the Virginia company literally sold shares in this adventure, hoping that they would be finding precious metals, Northwest Passage, anything of value that they could send back to England. And so there's basically multiple different folks that are here, gentlemen soldiers being one, your regular kind of soldiers that were outfitted by the Virginia company. So they're not purchasing their own things. They're actually, the Virginia company is using the investment income to outfit them to be prepared. And then you have your artisans that are basically looking at all of the natural resources in the area and hopefully finding things that will be of profit for the Virginia company. So that's kind of what we mean when we say gentlemen soldiers.
Gotcha. And so it's interesting, when archaeological items are found, there's certain things that you do find in the ground, and there's things you don't find in the ground. So you find glass, you find ceramic, you find different types of metal, but generally speaking, you don't find wood. Not in the sense that we think of wood, something that's hard and you can pick up and touch and isn't gonna, disintegrate on you. But in connection with your gentlemen soldiers, you guys had a very interesting find in a very interesting place. And the place in which it was found explains why you were able to find these two different types of materials, both metal and wood. So now let's talk about that Roman lock pistol and how you managed to recover, not only the lock and the barrel, which you guys have a variety of different firearms related parts. Janene sent over a list, and there's wheel lock stuff and matchlock stuff, but it's normally, barrels and other things. But this Roman lock pistol you managed to find with some wood, which is almost unheard of. So let's talk a little bit about what is a Roman lock pistol, where you found it, how you found it, and why it's important.
I think we should let Chris talk to the burial conditions and why it survives, and then we can talk about the significance of the object.
Yeah, sure. So the wood component is the most interesting component of the pistol, the fact that we have recovered actual wood. Typically in terrestrial sites, wood's going to be attacked by bacteria, it's going to be attacked by mold, fungi, and it's going to deteriorate the wood rather quickly. In this case, the wood was locked at the bottom of the well. The oxygen at the bottom of the well was used up through biological processes or by corrosion of metals to the point where it became anaerobic. And in an anaerobic environment, that's not going to support fungi. It's not going to support mold. So really, you only have two things that are impacting that wood: erosional bacteria, anaerobic bacteria that's attacking the cell walls, and hydrolysis. So over a long period of time, the dissolution of the wood itself, but that's a very slow process. So our main concern is the erosional bacteria. And that's a fairly slow process. And the fact that you don't have that fungus and that mold attacking it as well means that wood can survive for a much longer period in that kind of environment.
So that's like, for people to put it into a bigger context, like when they go very, very deep to a shipwreck and they find, the wooden timbers of a shipwreck, because it's a similar environment, deep down under the water in the cold temperatures, that's not deteriorating the wood. Is that correct?
It is to a certain degree. Like the Mary Rose, the part of the ship that we have now, that Portsmouth has now, was the part of the ship that was buried in the sand. in the sediment at the bottom. The rest of it is deteriorated away. But then if you go to the Baltic Sea, and at the bottom of the sea there, you do have the low oxygen levels. So the sea offers a bunch of different biological deteriorants, woodworm and such. But that life can't be supported at the bottom of the Baltic Sea because of the low oxygen levels again. So in that case, it is very similar.
Gotcha. Okay, and so Chris, you'd mentioned that this firearm was found in a well. So the $1 million question is, what is this gun doing in a well?
Oh, it was just lying there.
Oh, it wasn't partying. It wasn't trying to have a revolution. It was just lying there. Okay, gotcha.
No, that's a very interesting question. If you know the answer, please let us know.
Yeah.
The pistol was double loaded. It had a charge in it. It was essentially ready to be fired. Yet it was found at the bottom of the well. So was it an accident? Was it on purpose? Was someone in fear of their life? I'm throwing stuff out. There's nothing that supports this.
It was also fully functional from what we can tell. There was no reason for it to be tossed down there, as in it was non-repairable.
Right, like no
So-
broken mainsprings, nothing
Yeah.
like that. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So that's, maybe someone dropped it, maybe someone threw it. You mentioned that it was loaded. How were you able to verify that it was loaded? And is it still loaded?
Well, we were able to verify it because of x-rays that we took. We could see the 2 lead shot within the barrel. And when I started working on it, you could also hear them rolling around in the barrel.
Oh, wow.
And Michael and I removed that, 10, 15 years ago?
2009.
Yeah. So over a decade ago. And all it took for us was just to remove the concretion at the end of the barrel, and the 2 shot rolled right out. Now, a little bit of that powder charge came out as well, but we didn't really remove that until just about a year ago. And there is a video on the website that shows us putting an endoscope down the barrel of this pistol right after we had removed that charge.
That's amazing. So you have not only 17th century lead shot, but you have 17th century gunpowder in the collection. I mean, that is so very cool. You just don't find stuff like that, right?
It's not non-flammable now.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good for Janene as the curator, with having the stuff in the collection, right? You don't want to worry about part of your collection.
No, yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't want part of the collection to destroy another part of the collection, right? So how do you store that, since it's inflammable now? I mean, obviously you don't have to worry about it, combusting, but it's also not like a solid object. So Janene, how do you store gunpowder?
Well, what Chris has done for us with those, when they extracted the gunpowder, they put it in little vials. So right now we just have it in little vials, and there are other things in the collections that say they might be gunpowder. So the process would involve looking at it, testing it, seeing if it is consistent with an inactive gunpowder, and then storing it in a similar way in some kind of vial as opposed to a bag or box or anything. So
Gotcha. And we briefly mentioned matchlock firearms and wheel lock firearms, and now we're saying Roman lock, and that's a term that not everyone is familiar with. So can you explain what a Roman lock is?
Sure. So Roman lock is identified by one very specific characteristic, and that is where we've also had snap-haunces, which is another type of snap lock using the flint. But the Roman lock is a snap lock where it uses the flint to hit the steel to make the spark, but it has an exterior mainspring similar to a Michelet lock. But what it is, how it is different than the Michelet lock is that it pulls down on the front of the cock, whereby the Michelet lock passes behind and pushes up onto the cock to create the force for it to fly forward when you pull the trigger. So that is very rare. And I had never seen one in person until this one. And we went into the assumption, even though we had x-rays, we couldn't really see the very intricate details of the components of the lock in those x-rays. So we knew that they had snap-onces at this time, and we knew it wasn't a wheel lock, and we knew it wasn't a match lock. So we were like, okay, well, it's a snap-ons. They're also the shape of the butt. It has a fishtail butt, which led us to believe that it could have been a Scottish snap-ons. And we were, because it did have those types of characteristics with the kind of ornate fishtail. And when we started conserving on it and we were looking at it, and then we were able to expose, this is Chris and I were working together on this more than a decade ago. We were able to expose the mainspring and then identify it as a Roman lock. And interestingly, my father, Dr. James Lavin, he's the one who did the positive ID on it back in 2009.
Gotcha.
And he's written many books on firearms. So I inherited some of that, I guess.
There you go. And so we're talking, that Roman locks are rare, and you may or may not know the answer to this, but are there any other Roman locks in museum collections in the United States?
I don't know of any. There might be, and people, after we start doing things like this, public engagement, they might come forward and say, oh, we have X, Y, or Z. I have found parallels in Italy. So the earliest dated Roman lock that I have been able to find is in the military museum in Italy, and it's dated 1591.
Okay, very cool.
And it's just a lock. It's just a lock by itself, no gun.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I'd been trying to rack my brain thinking, in my museum career, the places I've worked and the collections that I've visited, and I couldn't think of any other museum that had a Roman lock. So I wasn't sure, at least here in the United States. So that's very cool that, if you don't want to have to get on a plane and fly across an ocean, the only place you're going to see a Roman lock is at Jamestown. So
had you heard of Roman locks before?
I had heard of them, yes. But like yourself, I'd never seen one, in person. So that was why initially I was very intrigued when I saw that initial video. I was like, oh man, this is something that people just aren't talking about here, because like you had mentioned, where it all falls under the general umbrella of flintlock, and so people understand and have heard of snap-ons and Micolay, but you throw Roman lock out there and you get crickets. People are not familiar.
You're separating
with that
the wheat from the chaff.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So with this firearm, and you guys have managed to get rid of the concretion at the end of the barrel, and you've managed to work on exposing the mainspring and other parts of the lock. But of course, the wood is the really critical, delicate part of this. How do you handle conserving an object that is three, because your lock is probably a different material than your barrel, right? So how do you deal with conserving
the lead shot?
Four. Yeah. So how do you deal with three different types of metals?
Literally have to try and separate as many, and we'll let Chris talk to that.
Right. Yeah. You've got all these different materials, and some of them with competing things that they need to stay stable. So that's a very delicate balance. How do you preserve the entirety of that object?
Through luck. Ideally, what you want to do is, so if you get a multi-component object like this pistol, you want to separate all the pieces out and treat them individually. Because if they are connected, then you're really having to make a choice. And in the case of the pistol, I thought we were going to have three components, the copper alloy barrel, the iron lock plates, and the wood of the stock itself to contend with. Now, luckily, before we got to a critical phase in the treatment, we were able to remove the barrel. So it really came down to a choice. Did I want to put emphasis on the iron, or did I want to put emphasis on the wood? And one of the things you're going to do is take photographs all along, all throughout the process. So you have that recorded. And I was thinking, well, the Roman lock, fairly rare, but we have photographs. We now know what it looks like. What's extremely rare on archaeological sites is recovery of the wood. So I made the choice to conserve the wood and do what I could for the iron lock plate. So it really comes down to a choice. And then you do what you can to mitigate the damage to the other component. I'm gonna, as we talk today, I'm gonna try not to get too much into the chemistry, but I can't promise that that's gonna be the case. But for instance, this critical phase in the conservation of the pistol was the impregnation of the wood with polyethylene glycol. And polyethylene glycol will cause iron to corrode. So I had to come up with a corrosion inhibitor for the iron that would not impact the wood nor the polyethylene glycol. We have working partnerships of other institutions, friends across those institutions. So I conferred with some of my other conservation colleagues, and they suggested sodium nitrite, which basically is going to impact the pH of the solution, and it's going to raise it to a point where the iron is passivated. So the iron wouldn't corrode. The polyethylene glycol would do its part with the wood, and hopefully the wood would come out of that process, or the entire pistol would come out of that process intact, which in this case it absolutely did. So
okay. And you guys actually were able to determine the type of wood in the stock, correct?
Yes, we worked with Chris Swan, who's at Colonial Williamsburg, and we had some small sections that we were able to provide him of underneath the barrel, where he was able to thin section the wood and identify it as a fruit wood, most likely cherry.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. That's cherry is not one of the more common woods that you're going to find. I mean, they certainly do exist, but in terms of like with long rifles, you tend to think of cherry being more of a luxury wood as opposed to your walnut or your maple or things of that nature. So that's interesting that they would have used cherry wood on that. So Chris, is the pistol at this point and all the individual components, is it fairly stable? Is the conservation like nearing its end, or is it still a very ongoing process?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? I think once you have recovered an artifact and it's gone through the active conservation, you're responsible for that artifact for as long as possible after that. So the conservation actually never truly ends. We are actively monitoring the environment within the display case that it's in. If the relative humidity in that case gets too high, that's actually probably going to be better for the wood, but it's going to cause the iron components to corrode. If it gets too low, that wood's going to shrink and distort, and it's nearly impossible to return it to its original dimensions. Yet the iron components or the metal components will be very happy in that. So it's a tightrope walk between relative humidity, between the varying percentages of relative humidity, and it takes active monitoring. So conservation actually doesn't ever truly end. So.
Gotcha. That's a great point because that obviously that's not how I was thinking of it when I was thinking in terms of ending. You're right. It is an ongoing process and an ongoing battle, really, right? I mean, because the different components will fight one another all through the process. But the conservation is complete enough that the object is able to go on display. And so, Janene, with having that on display in the museum, how do you display something like that? Is the firearm, are all the pieces, put back together? Are the different materials touching one another? Are they kept, just far enough apart so that they're not interacting? So basically, how do you keep Chris from yelling at you about the way it's on display?
Anytime we go in. Yeah, I just don't tell him when I go look at it. But so Chris actually, we just released a video a couple of days ago or last week maybe, on the fourth part of the video series, and you can see the end process. So he was able to put it all back together, which you can talk more about if you'd like more information, but put it all back together in a way that we can take it apart again if we need to, and then has built a mount for it, and that is on display in the museum. So the lead shot is not back in the barrel, that is sitting next to it, and we've got a little one of the powder samples there, but the gun itself is currently mended together in one piece. So
Gotcha.
And Janene mentioned that we have it in this exhibit, which we've called Gentlemen Soldiers, and the entirety of the team works together on the research and choosing of the artifacts, how they'll be displayed, literally their physical locations. We write all the text for the exhibit panels, the labels for the artifacts. We even do the artwork and design the cases here. So we basically take responsibility for everything except for the actual manufacturing of the case and the printing and the installation of the exhibit plinths and graphic panels. Everything else we do ourselves. We make our own mounts. I do the brazing for the mounts, and Chris will actually do the mounting onto the exhibit. Janene will help with all of the text and creating the overall story that we're trying to get across to the visitor about Gentlemen Soldiers in this particular case. And then the director of the museum, Jamie May, is also a graphic artist. So wow. She'll take all of this and create these, we have massive panels that are relaying the story or showing parallels to these items in, paintings. So often we go back to period paintings in order to show exact parallels of what we have found in the ground. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. We do everything from excavation to exhibit display.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there's not always a team available at a museum that can do everything like that. Sometimes things get farmed out of necessity because there's not always large enough staff to accommodate different things, or there's just not different skill sets. How many folks work in your museum?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not enough. We need more.
It's never enough. I know that to be a fact. It is never enough. I worked at the Smithsonian, okay, and I can tell you, resources and staff galore, and it's never enough. So,
yes. So we currently have a staff of about 8 or 9, if you include myself, in conservation and curatorial, and about. It depends, because sometimes we hire seasonal folks for the excavation season, but usually between 10 and 12 individuals. We also run a field school through the University of Virginia. That's a 6-week field school in the summer, late spring, early summer. But we do, for our 22.5 acres, we have the museum. We do have gift shop staff, maintenance staff, ticketing staff. We probably have about between 45 and development department, 45 and 50 full-time employees for Jamestown Rediscovery Foundation.
but as the museum, about a core-ish of 8 or so, right? And which
For
really for a
conservation
museum,
collections, yeah. We just hired
which
one
really
more.
is pretty substantial. I mean, there are a lot of museums that have far fewer staff than that and are trying to do as many jobs as all you guys are doing. So I totally understand. 8 people may not sound like a lot to some folks, but in the museum world, being able to have 8 dedicated museum professionals across a broad variety of skills is, you guys are actually in a very fortunate spot, even though, as you say, it's never enough folks. You could always use some more people. But that's great that you have such a wide variety of folks on staff and that you can tap into all those different skill sets on site. That isn't always the case at different sites. So, Janene, you look like you had something to say.
I do, yes. It's actually going backwards for topics though, because I think we kind of skipped over this part about the pistol and the well that it was found in. So if we can backtrack for a minute.
Absolutely.
We talked about such a tightly dated site, and especially for contexts like the wells. So this one in particular, we know was filled in sometime between 1610, 11 to 1617. Because of we've got TPQs, which is terminus postquem artifacts in there, including artifacts that would have had to come from Bermuda. So they came over when the Sea Venture eventually made its way post-starving time. So we've got cow bones, as well as limestone pipes. And then we also have a halberd from Lord Delaware's group, halberdiers. So it's got his insignia crest on it. So he comes in 1610 as well, and that is in the museum as well. And it's actually got a bent end. So going back to why is the pistol in there, and some of the theories are that they actually bent that halberd, or isn't there a bill in there too that's also bent?
There's a pike.
A pike. So they could have tried to scoop it out with one of those things as well. But so we know got to be at least post 1610, but before 1617. 1616, when the governor's addition is built on top of that well.
Okay, so that's a very tight date range there.
It's really interesting because they put a chimney from the governor's house directly over the backfilled well. And over time, when you encounter an archaeological feature, you're going to take the latest thing out first. And so we took layers of these hearths out, and you could see that the hearths were sinking over time, and they kept on repairing it and buttressing the chimney over time because it was sinking. And they must have forgotten about this well by the time that or chose to, I don't know why they would have done it, but it doesn't make no sense, to put it over this freshly backfilled 16-foot deep feature. So when we encountered the original hearth, the actual cobbles that were placed for the hearth, portions of it were on the stable ground next to the well, and the other part had sunk 5.5 feet down into the well.
Oh, wow. That is a substantial slump.
Yes. So during the lifetime of that chimney, it slumped probably about a foot.
Okay. Wow. And Janene, you had mentioned that there's a halberd in there and a pike, and that possibly maybe they were being used to try to fish this gun out. And I think that's if that story, if that is true, it's interesting, because then you're taking one vital weapon and rendering it useless by bending it to try to retrieve another weapon. And so I think that tells an interesting story about the importance of firearms to the people there at Jamestown, as opposed to some of the other weapons that they have there. So you mentioned halberts and you mentioned pikes. Have you guys found swords or any other types of weaponry there?
Yeah, we have pretty much anything you can think of, I believe.
Yes.
We've got swords, rapiers, bills, pikes, halberds, the firearms that we've discussed already, crossbow bolts, projectile points from the Virginia Indians.
Cannon
I know
shot.
I'm missing stuff. Yeah, the falconet, daggers. There's got to be something else that it's just. It's just not there.
Full suits of armor.
Yeah, we have a huge.
Wow.
It's a
Elements of not an entire full suit of armor, but
Yeah, a guy fell down the well, still in his suit, right?
That pistol was really nice. They really wanted it back.
That's right.
But yeah, so we have arms and armor of different types and classes and shape. So there's pretty much everything that you could think of in the collection, which is amazing.
it's often hard for me to comprehend, these gentlemen walking around in 3/4 or full suits of armor at Jamestown in the middle of summer. It must have been just a horrible experience for them. And, during times of peace, we're sure that they were shedding those quickly because they did not like it. So one of the things that we have that's in the Gentleman Soldiers exhibit is the bavor and the visor to a closed helmet that has, you can see that has been pried away from the rest of the skull cap portion of the helmet. And we have a parallel that we purchased that is an exact same source as the one that we found archaeologically, but it's complete because it's misshapen. The archaeological example is misshapen and it's been pried off, so it's missing the rest of the helmet. And then next to it, in another case, we have the full object of what it would have looked like, a survivor.
Gotcha. Any idea why something like that would have been pried off of it?
I just think maybe they just wanted only the head protection portion.
Okay, interesting.
But sometimes it's difficult to understand why. What is this doing here?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a lot obviously to see at Jamestown. There's the fort itself, your archaeological field school. There's the church. There's the museum. There's a word that I know I'm going to butcher, but that archarium, is that
archaearium?
Archaearium. Okay, there you go. I knew I was going to butcher it. So there's a lot for folks to see there at Jamestown. So if you could tell us just, in a better pitch than what I just did, that if someone wants to come and see Jamestown, what they can expect to experience while they're there, and other ways that they can connect with you guys and the site as a whole.
Well, definitely people should check out our website, the Historic Jamestown with an E at the end.org. And also we have our own YouTube channel, the Jamestown Rediscovery YouTube channel, where at least monthly, if not more often, we're uploading videos about the research or the archaeology. So even if you can't make it on site, you can participate with us by watching videos of what we're doing. And then the island itself, if you do make it here, it's a 1,500-acre island that we share with the National Park Service. The Park Service took over the rest of the island in the 1930s. But again, Preservation Virginia acquired the property in 1893. But yes, the ongoing archaeology program, meet and talk with archaeologists. We do first-person interpretation sometimes you can meet Annis Toddkill or one of the other characters from Jamestown, the historic figures from Jamestown. We also do blacksmithing demonstrations and see the original church tower ruins, which dates to the 1680s, the only above ground structure on the islands on our property. The memorial church, again, the museum, take an archaeologist-led tour. So there's plenty of things to see. Even you can do the 5-mile loop around the island to experience the nature of around Jamestown.
And I have to say that the three of us and others included are out there giving the tours as well. So there's a very good chance you'll meet one of us.
Awesome.
Definitely.
All the more reason.
We have a director of education who also does virtual school programs. So if there are any teachers out there who want there's several topics that he covers, but that information is on historicjamestown.org, and those are really great programs. He's slowly taking over the country. He's got like half the states at this point, a teacher.
Okay.
But yeah, so he does really good programs, and I think he has a separate YouTube channel that's something like Jamestown Rediscovery Education. Yeah, so we also have an Instagram and Facebook. But back to the website, we have been trying to get more and more of our artifacts represented on the website. We have reached over 200 at this point, but for people who are interested in the types of things we're finding and researching in our reference collection development, we're trying to get more of those up on the website as we go along. So check back.
Awesome. That's great. Any last things you guys want to touch on that we might have accidentally glossed over or missed?
No, I think we did a really good job. Thank you to Janene and Chris, and thank you for inviting us to be on your program. And if there's anything that we love talking about more, I don't think there is. I mean, we love talking about Jamestown. You can see the enthusiasm in the room, and yeah, just keep in touch, because we love to share all of the discoveries. And if anybody wants to come and see the collection or has a research design specific to our collection, we entertain those as well. There's a policy that we have in place for access to the collections. We are still somewhat dealing with COVID. So there are a few restrictions with that, but other than that, we enjoy hosting researchers and forming these collaborations.
Wonderful. That's great, because there's there's always something more to learn, and everyone is learning from everyone else, right? And thankfully we're so interconnected now through the internet and being able to reach out to everyone. I know there are international folks that listen and watch the podcast. So maybe your director of education may end up with something international. Who knows? But at any rate, Michael, Chris, Janene, I really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to talk with me about Jamestown in general, about your gentlemen soldiers, about the internal tug of war of the different pieces of your pistol that are fighting with one another on a daily basis. It's been a joy having you guys on here. I know I've been to visit Jamestown in person. It's been a number of years, but I encourage anyone who's able to make their way down into Tidewater, Virginia, to definitely come and see you guys. And just once again, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome. Thank you.